I'm going to discuss the US Senate resolution backing the anti-government protesters here in Thailand in just a moment. But first, I want to give a little background information. I've worked for years to expose US meddling in Thailand's internal political affairs. I've shown how the US National Endowment for Democracy, funded and overseen by the US government, is behind the core organizations driving Thailand's political unrest today. These include groups like Project Thai, I-Law, Thai Lawyers for Human Rights Lawyers Association, the Assembly of the Poor, Isan Record, Book Republic, Benar News, Thai Netizen, and many others. These are groups that either support the ongoing anti-government protests or are involved directly in them. I-Law, for example, was involved in attempts to rewrite the Thai constitution, one of the key demands of the protesters. A US-funded front was actually trying to rewrite Thailand's constitution. Think about that. Thai Lawyers for Human Rights and Human Rights Lawyers Association both work directly with the protest leaders and even supply staff as protest leaders. Core protest leader Anand Nampa works for US government-funded Thai Lawyers for Human Rights. Now, these protesters seek to oust the government, rewrite the Thai constitution, and now they're openly calling for the monarchy to be abolished. That this is all being driven by groups funded by the US government means that Thailand isn't just under attack by a corrupt, billionaire-led opposition party here inside Thailand, but also by a foreign government. The US is a nation that has invaded, occupied, and destroyed nations all across the globe, and is still targeting many other nations right now as we speak, including Thailand. And despite all of this evidence, the US Embassy here in Bangkok has repeatedly denied backing the ongoing protests, claiming the US does not support any individual or political party. Yet, this recent US Senate resolution put forward by two pro-war, pro-intervention, and pro-regime change senators, Menendez and Durbin, is the US openly taking the side of the protesters. And by extension, the US is taking the side of the corrupt, billionaire-led opposition parties hiding behind the protesters. This includes Thaksin Shinawatra and his Pheu Thai party and Thanaton's Move Forward party. Now, let's take a look at this resolution. It's basically everything the protesters have been claiming throughout this unrest. They complain about Thailand's history of coups, the 2014 coup in particular, claims that the 2019 election wasn't fair, that Thanaton's Future Forward Party's banning was somehow unfair. It also complains about missing so-called activists they suggest the government kidnapped or killed. Of course, no evidence is provided, and also complaining about how the current government is handling the protests. The US Senate resolution accuses the Thai government of being repressive and using violence. So they complain about the 2014 coup, never talking about the real violence that took place, necessitating the coup in the first place. But then they basically accuse the current government of using violence against the ongoing protesters today with no evidence at all. So you can see just how completely one-sided and politically motivated this US Senate resolution actually is. A lot of the resolution's complaints about how the Thai government is handling the protests is based on the claim that the protesters are peaceful. But we know they're not. The protest leaders have illegally blocked roads on a nearly daily basis. They've vandalized and destroyed public and private property at almost every rally. They've attempted to cross police barriers by force, starting the alleged violence the US blames the Thai government for. And more recently, the protesters have begun using firearms and approaching sensitive locations, including the National Police Headquarters, the Royal Palace, and even a military base. So this is a list of claims and accusations made against the Thai government that could just as easily have come from the protest stage itself. And that's no surprise since, as I've pointed out, the US has been funding these protests from the very beginning. Now, the resolution ends by making a few demands. It calls on the US government to support the right of the people of Thailand to peacefully and democratically determine their future. The easiest way the US can help ensure that happens, Thais democratically determining their future, is by ending America's interference in Thailand's internal political affairs, by backing this opposition, and actually letting Thai people determine these things themselves. The resolution also urges that the US Senate stands in solidarity with the people of Thailand in their quest for a democratically elected government, political reforms, long-term peace, and respect for established international human rights standards. This is where the US government openly sides with the Thai opposition, right here. The current Thai government was already elected. Only the protesters and the opposition who lost the elections say otherwise, and they are by far not the majority. These political reforms are also something only this small, unpopular opposition want. And as far as the long-term peace, before these protests began, that's exactly what Thailand was enjoying since the coup in 2014, ousted the Yingluck government and ended all the abuse and violence taking place under it. Now, the U.S. Senate Committee for Foreign Affairs website, which posted the announcement for this resolution, quotes Senator Menendez, who says, "At a time when democracy is under assault from so many quarters, it is critical that the United States Senate stands with the democracy movement in Thailand. Thailand's reformers are not seeking a revolution. They are simply yearning for democratic changes to their country's political system, for freedom of speech and assembly, and for Thailand to be part of the community of democratic nations." Let me translate this for you. First, he's admitting the US Senate resolution is about openly siding with the protesters. Second, he's claiming the protesters aren't seeking revolution. Well, if you're in Thailand, you see with your own eyes them in the street demanding every day the government be ousted, the constitution completely rewritten, the monarchy abolished, and attacking virtually anything that represents Thai culture and values. That's not reform. That's erasing Thailand. And when he says the protesters want Thailand to be part of the community of democratic nations, he's talking about getting Thailand to tilt away from China and back towards the West. And one last thing, just so you fully understand what these US senators are talking about when they refer to democratic nations, here's Thai-born US Senator Tammy Duckworth supporting this resolution. She says, "As a Thai American who fought to protect the right to peacefully protest here at home, I know that both the long-standing, strong relationship between the US and Thailand, as well as every individual's inalienable democratic rights, are critically important to uphold and defend." Duckworth fought to protect the right to peacefully protest in the US? When did she do that? Is she talking about her time as an American soldier in Iraq? She fought in an illegal war based on a deliberate lie, a war that killed 1 million people in Iraq and has left Iraq to this day in complete chaos. The illegal US invasion of Iraq is one of the worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century. So how was Duckworth's involvement in a criminal war based on a lie fighting for freedom in the US? So if you needed any more evidence on how dishonest this US Senate resolution against Thailand actually is, there you go. This is what they call fighting for democracy. Lying about other countries, meddling in them, sometimes invading them, robbing them, and also never leaving because the US is still in Iraq to this day. That sounds more like imperialism to me and injustice on a global scale. And this talk about democracy is something they are just hiding it all behind. For years, the US has been funding and backing the Thai opposition. The US government helped create organizations like Thai Lawyers for Human Rights right after the 2014 coup. And ever since, every step of the way, the US has been standing side by side with these protesters, sometimes literally. This resolution is an open admission and a signal the US is ready to place more pressure more openly on Thailand. Thais are going to have to really stand together. Keep the pressure up on the US funded groups behind these protesters, and continue intelligently and patiently exposing and defending against these protests. Please like and share this video if you thought it was useful. Subscribing to my channel really helps it grow, and I really appreciate that. Please check the video description for references as well as ways you can help support my work. This includes a link to my Patreon account where not only can you help contribute monthly, but you can also get some input and you also get extra content and benefits in return. And for all of you already helping out, thank you so much. And to everyone, as always, thank you for watching.